Thank you very much, Bill, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate very much the opportunity to join in this conference that you're having here this week and to offer my congratulations to the service on its 20th anniversary and to recognize in this occasion an opportunity for all of us to review the work that we're doing in the area of labor relations, and hopefully out of our discussions find new ideas, new techniques that will advance this phase of American life to new productivity in behalf of all of our citizens. I want to particularly welcome the occasion to meet so many of you that are engaged in the work of the service. I, too, am impressed with the fact that Bill Simpkin's management is so effective that all of you can be here at the same time. I'm going to try to learn from him just how you manage this technique in your organization. I want also to tell you that the work that you perform is highly regarded by the President and by the other officials of the administration. The field of labor management relations has assumed such a national importance, the growth of our economy, the involvement of government in so many different activities, that the role that you play assumes an ever greater importance as the days go by. I want also to commend Bill Simpkin in front of his associates for the leadership that he has provided and continues to provide, and the importance that all of us see in his contribution. As Bill has indicated in his introduction, I would like to take a few moments of your time to talk about a matter which I believe is of interest to you from a number of different points of view. The Federal Employee Management Cooperation Program is of interest to you because it is an effort to move in the federal government in the direction of fruitful relationships between employees as groups and the federal government as managers. And as federal officials, you have also not only a professional interest, but an individual interest with respect to this program. And as federal officials, you share with thousands of others in the federal government a program interest in seeing to it that the administrative phase, the implementation, if you will, of the Great Society programs are carried out in such a fashion that the high expectation of the American people is fulfilled to the highest degree. All of us, in 1967 and in the years ahead, are partners in an effort to see to it that the administrative processes of the federal government are able to deliver in such a way that the broad spectrum of programs enacted by the Congress in its recent sessions will reach the American people and will reach them in the form that was intended, and that the action of those who work for the government is fully responsive to that intent. And so as we look at the task of the executive branch today, we look at it in these program terms. And these are, in turn, very human terms because they're aimed at providing a higher quality of life for all Americans. And those of us that are privileged to serve the government at this time have a mission of great humanistic meaning. It seems to me that that meaning also relates to our own internal management and the capability of management within the federal government to recognize the importance of its reliance upon the skill and the morale, the understanding of each individual that works for the government, and the role that the groups of individuals, groups formed as unions, have to play in the progress of the government. But my program is limited just to this one program, and I don't want to, one feature, and I don't want to stray too far afield. Although I'm sure we could spend a productive time together talking about a great variety of personnel policies that relate to the federal government and have not only a direct meaning to you in your employment, but have related meaning in the private sector where you're also working. I think it's particularly appropriate that we look at our public employee management relations at this time. This is an area of growth. This is an area of new and sometimes complex relationships. The entire leadership element of the country is looking more and more to what is happening in the public sector in this field. Troublesome problems have arisen in recent times, and we must join together to find viable solutions for those problems so that the public interest of which Secretary Wirt spoke so eloquently can be fully served. In the past year, there has been an increasing evidence of interest in the matter of employee management relations in the public sector. I would commend to your reading the report of George Taylor and his colleagues delivered to Governor Rockefeller last year. To me, this is one of the finest expositions of the issues that are involved. I think it's required reading for all of us in this profession and for all of us that have a concern about this problem. As a backdrop for the panel that's to follow, I'd like to set the stage and talk with you for a few minutes about the federal program for employee management cooperation. Upon the completion of nearly 5 years of experience under the program enunciated by President Kennedy in Executive Order 10988. I'd like to point out that this federal program, initiated in 1962 out of a study conducted the previous year under the leadership of Arthur Goldberg, was not conceived in an atmosphere of crisis or emergency. There was a recognition of a genuine need on the part of federal management for a statement of government-wide executive policy, a statement that had not existed in legislative or executive form up to that time. There was a proper demand and a mounting demand from employee organizations for a statement of rights and privileges to reinforce their status and their role in dealing with management in the federal context. The purpose and the main theme of the federal program has been to achieve constructive cooperation between management and employee organizations. It has produced some excellent results beneficial to both parties. On the other hand, it has certainly not been without difficulties and clearly with some dissatisfactions on both sides. There are obvious similarities between labor management relations in the public service and in private employment. The aspirations of working people are the same everywhere. The responsibilities of government supervisors and managers are not unlike those that are found in the private sector. The dissimilarities are perhaps not quite as obvious to those who have studied this field. So let me take a moment or two to outline some of the characteristics of the federal service which have a bearing on the employee management program and certain of its arrangements. The most obvious characteristic, I think, is the size and diversity of the federal workforce. 2.7 million employees in 60-odd departments and agencies, with some 1,800 principal offices and installations located all over the world. This excludes the Post Office Department, which alone has 34,000 offices. And it excludes, of course, a host of smaller offices and installations and duty stations in other departments and agencies. We have formal dealings in the federal government with 111 different employee organizations, ranging all the way from the traditional craft and industrial unions to the so-called government unions, which exist in particular departments, such as in the Postal Service and the Internal Revenue Service, and others that have large memberships across agency or departmental lines. The fact that the workforce is spread all over the world is not an academic consideration. As our program has unfolded in these past 5 years, I can recall significant developments relating to workers on the Alaska Railroad, guards in the Panama Canal Zone, and teachers in the dependent schools of the military departments in Western Europe. A unique characteristic, too, is the important influence and the direct participation of employee organizations in the legislative process. They long have testified before the committees of Congress on personnel legislation and have worked closely with committee staffs in offering their version of proposed bills. They hold large-scale rallies to influence the views of Congress with respect to pay legislation and other legislation of benefit to employees. And they have ready access to committees and members of Congress to air their complaints and their grievances and to offer petitions in their behalf. This is access that has been guaranteed since 1912 in the Lloyd-La Follette Act. There is extensive coverage by statute of the principal areas of federal personnel policy and procedure, and that are therefore not open to negotiation or discussion. The basic rules governing hiring, pay, hours, leave, job classification, performance rating, fringe benefits, and many other matters are set by law. And the Congress is the policy determining body. In most cases, these legal provisions are supplemented by Civil Service Commission regulations. And when drafting such regulations, the Commission endeavors to consult with employee organizations as well as agency management. Finally, the great size and spread of the principal departments and agencies have brought about departmental personnel policies and procedures, which further implement the statutes and the Commission's regulations. Another difference, the right to join unions is not of recent vintage in the federal service. It's been a tradition for more than half a century. But unlike the private sector, organization membership extends up through supervisory and managerial ranks in many of the departments. About 1/3 of federal employees, 762,000, belonged to organizations at the time of the task force study in 1961. And many of the organizations represented by that number included individuals with supervisory and managerial responsibilities. A final difference is that principal characteristic in federal employment that's embodied in the no-strike tradition. It is based in law, Public Law 330 of 1955, and requires individual employee affidavits at the time of employment, renouncing the right to strike. It provides for automatic removal and other penalties for violation. More important, this provision, this tradition, has been accepted over a long period of time by the recognized employee organizations, and it appears in their constitutions and is subscribed to by their leadership and their members. Of course, even law and tradition are not absolute guarantees against strikes or work stoppages. We've seen this demonstrated at the state and local level, but we've also seen that there are instances of this in the federal government. A jurisdictional strike by one of the unions working with the Tennessee Valley Authority in August 1962 required the dismissal of some 85 sheet metal workers in Kentucky. In December 1964, a work stoppage was threatened by teachers in the military-dependent schools in Europe, and was averted only after firm action by the Department of Defense. By and large, however, the no-strike tradition is not only professed, but is followed by employee organizations in the government service. Within this framework that I've outlined, our aim has been to establish, through this program, principles which would strengthen and regularize relations between agency management and employee organizations in the executive branch. Pensions are granted to organizations having as little as 10% membership in a given unit. Exclusive recognition and the right to negotiate agreements is authorized for organizations which represent a majority. Informal recognition and the right to be heard is available to organizations of any size. Emphasis in the program is on decentralized arrangements and on dealings as close to the worksite as possible, so as to ensure meaningful communication and cooperation between the parties who are immediately affected. Under unusual circumstances, as for example in the Post Office Department, exclusive recognition and negotiation at the national level is practicable, as well as at the regional and local levels. The subject matter and the scope of consultation or negotiation is limited so as to operate within the framework of law and regulation. As I mentioned, the employee organizations always have direct participation in the making of laws and regulations. The rights of consultation and negotiation also exclude such areas of discretion and policy as an agency's mission, its budget, its organization and the assignment of its personnel, and the technology of performing its work. These are basic elements of the public official's responsibility to interpret and administer the law. Agency management retains rights similar to those in management in the private sector, the rights to hire, fire, maintain the efficiency of operations, and so on. Even with these limitations, the scope of consultation or negotiation ranges widely over a variety of personnel policies and over working conditions which affect the well-being of employees and are within the discretion of responsible management. The system places emphasis on direct bilateral relationships between agency management and employee organization representatives. The Labor Department provides technical assistance by arranging for advisory arbitration of disputes relating to unit and majority determinations. The Civil Service Commission provides technical guidance and assistance on other matters. And let me say here that in the course of the past 5 years, there has been a very close, continuing, and harmonious relationship between the Department and the Commission in this program, a partnership which I value extremely highly. Recognizing that both the management and the organizations were relatively inexperienced in the opening days of this program, it was decided that during the developmental stages, any provision for third-party rulings would unnecessarily limit the ability of the parties to establish relationships suited to particular situations. Similarly, no provision was made for third-party final determination on negotiation impasses, on the principle that it would tend to weaken the obligation of the parties to work out their differences by hard, serious negotiation. The program provides instead for agency management and the employee organizations to develop their own techniques, short of arbitration, to assist in negotiation and the avoidance of impasses. On the other hand, where grievance procedures are concerned, and this, I should add, is an area where the presidential task force that did the preliminary work prior to the executive order found significant deficiencies in past practice. The parties, with respect to grievance procedures, are authorized to negotiate arrangements for advisory arbitration in their grievance and appeals procedures. About 40% of the agreements which have been negotiated provide for grievance arbitration. One other policy is worthy of mention in this quick summarization. Since membership in some organizations extends up through the supervisory and management ranks, we've had to take note of the potential for conflict of interest if such personnel also hold leadership positions in rank-and-file organizations. The need, of course, is to rule out evils which could result from an absence of arm's-length bargaining and from restraint of free competition among unions for recognition. There's the further practical need to see that agencies maintain in their management and supervisory officials concepts of management responsibility similar to those of managers in the private sector. As a general summation, after 5 years of experience, I would say that splendid progress has been made in establishing meaningful relationships within the framework I have described. The agencies have accepted the program as an important part of the job of managing the federal workforce. The employee organizations have gained responsible status, a stable and increasing membership, and representation rights that ensure substantial participation in the policy-setting processes within the departments. To put this in quantitative terms, let me say that union membership has grown nearly 1/3 since 1961 to a total of about 1 million membership. I should add that the workforce during the same period of time has grown some 17%. Or put in another way, 33% of the workforce were union members in 1961, 37% of the workforce were union members in 1966. 90% of postal employees, that is 620,000, have exclusive representation. 22% of other federal employees, 434,000, have exclusive representation. 1,170 exclusive units, including only the 7 Post Office Department national exclusives, and there are 600 negotiated agreements, including, again, those 7 from the Post Office Department. You may ask, what have been the benefits achieved? Well, I would say that for the most part, the benefits have been achieved at the local level, as was intended. The Civil Service Commission inspectors make on-site inquiries as to the status of the program, both to local union leaders and to agency officials, as a part of their regular inspection of personnel practices in the government. These inspections cover several hundred installations in the course of a year. The reports are that relationships are cooperative in the vast majority of situations. Agency officials report specific improvement in communication between management and employees, that is, communication both ways, and significant benefits, for example, in such areas as safety practices, tours of duty, health and working conditions, control of sick leave abuse, just to name a few. As I mentioned, before the Employee Management Cooperation Program was inaugurated, the lack of adequate grievance machinery was a major source of employee dissatisfaction. There is marked evidence that there has been a reduction in dissatisfaction with the grievance procedure since the program was undertaken. Altogether, the program has broken a great deal of new ground. Inevitably, it gave rise to some immediate problems, and a great deal of time and, frankly, expense was involved in management and employee organization training and in handling initial disputes regarding appropriate units. These early difficulties have largely been resolved and hopefully largely forgotten. Some employee organizations were naturally reluctant to accept various of the program limitations and turned to the courts for relief. However, in 2 cases, which reached the U.S. Court of Appeals, the validity of the executive order was upheld, and it was established that the program did not create any judicially enforceable rights. But there are problems remaining, and I would be the first to grant that that is the case, and the time and effort must be expended in an effort to find solutions to these problems. I think that they boil down to a few, and I'd like to share them with you. First, conflict of interest. A few of the government unions have found it difficult to adapt to the policy that supervisory and managerial officials may not hold leadership roles in rank-and-file organizations. There is general consistency in most agencies' approach to conflict of interest questions, but there have been some variations. Differences in organization, in delegations of authority, and in the type of work properly account for most of these variations. However, this remains a knotty problem, a difficult question to answer, and I think we can expect some adjustments in this area as we move along the progressive route. A different but related question concerns the propriety of exclusive recognition and negotiation for units made up entirely of supervisors. This is a matter not covered by the order. General practice is to grant formal recognition and consultation rights only, but exclusive units of supervisors have been established in some agencies, and this raises doubt as to the proper policy to be pursued. Second, the scope of consultation and negotiation. There have been problems in determining which matters are open to negotiation and which are not. There have been some organization complaints about the order's exclusion of matters of organization, mission, budget, and the like. And there are complaints that some agencies do not delegate adequate authority for negotiation to their local managers. While these problems are still with us, they're being worked out one by one, case by case, as they come to light. The problems are complicated, of course, by the fact that the large agencies deal with scores of different organizations representing fragments of their total employee population. Third, negotiation impasses. Some agencies, such as the Post Office Department, have developed an effective system through which apparent impasses at the local level are referred to the regional level or to the national level if necessary, and are considered successively by management and employee representatives at each level. Impasses in general negotiations are ultimately resolved by the Postmaster General himself. Several agencies have negotiated provisions for mediation or fact-finding. The program is still weak in this area, I believe, and we have given strong encouragement from the Commission to the departments to make wider use of these techniques with which you're so familiar. We're continuing to watch the matter of negotiation impasses closely. It may be that agencies and organizations are reaching a state of experience where further special measures would be warranted. Fourth, and last of the significant dissatisfactions which persist, is the question of setting up a central labor management panel, or as the press likes to call it, a little NLRB, or some similar third-party arrangement to really give authoritative interpretation of the order and to consider charges of unfair labor practices. This is a proposal that was considered but not adopted when the program was initiated in 1961, and it has been considered again, I guess, almost every year since. The essential question is what necessary or really useful purpose a central authority would serve, and whether it would weaken the bilateral relationships which have been the main emphasis and value of the program as it has developed so far. In conclusion, and I apologize, Bill, for taking so long, let me say, as I did at the outset, that I believe the program for employee management cooperation in the federal service has had some excellent results. But it is not an unqualified success, nor will it ever reach a point where it can be described as an unqualified success. I view this as a program that must continue in evolution, that it must benefit from experience, that it calls for the kind of discussion that hopefully can be held here this afternoon. Yet in the period of only 5 years, we have indeed made progress. We've traveled a good distance, far enough so I feel absolutely certain that we're on the right road. But it's a matter of charting the route yet ahead with even greater care. For we have achieved a working system, and it has produced broad areas of cooperative agreement, with the public interest remaining as the paramount consideration. We're surely not without problems, and we may well make adjustments in the program as we go along. It is a need that we face for balance in the public interest, where it is possible for the government to serve the needs of the American people as it intended by the Congress and the President, and at the same time exercise a management relationship with employees which brings about the kind of fruitful partnership that is particularly essential in a public enterprise. Thank you very much.